In the spring of 1998, one name dominated every newspaper front page, every late-night monologue, and every nightly news broadcast in America. Monica Lewinsky was 24 years old, and almost overnight, she became one of the most talked about and most publicly humiliated women on the planet. Nearly 3 decades later, she's still here. But the woman making headlines today looks almost nothing like the caricature the tabloids created in 1998. This is the story of what actually happened to Monica Lewinsky, not the sensationalized version that circulated online for years, but the documented one. Her early life, the scandal that defined a presidency, the brutal decade that followed, and the long, deliberate work of rebuilding a life and a reputation in full public view. Monica Samil Lewinsky was born on July 23, 1973, in San Francisco, California, and raised primarily in Beverly Hills. Her father, Bernard Lewinsky, was an oncologist who built a successful medical practice in Los Angeles. Her mother, Marcia Lewis, was a writer with her own ambitions in media and publishing. The family's history was shaped by displacement and reinvention. Bernard's family had fled Germany in the years leading up to the Holocaust, eventually settling in the United States after years of relocation. That history of survival and rebuilding would, in an odd echo, come to define his daughter's own adult life decades later. Monica grew up in material comfort, attending private schools in and around Beverly Hills alongside the children of entertainment industry executives and producers. It was a world defined by high expectations and visible wealth. And by her own later accounts, it was also a household under strain. Her parents' marriage ended in a difficult and public divorce when she was a teenager, a split that reportedly involved significant acrimony and left a lasting impression on her sense of trust and family stability. She attended Beverly Hills High School before transferring to Bel Air Prep, a small, private school known for taking on students who needed a different academic environment. She thrived there, becoming active in drama, art, and choir, and graduated near the top of a small senior class. She went on to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, where she majored in psychology, a field she has said fascinated her because of her own interest in understanding people, emotional patterns, and behavior. She graduated in 1995 and, within weeks, secured a position that would change the entire course of her life. After graduating from Lewis and Clark, Lewinsky moved to Washington, D.C., and secured an unpaid internship at the White House through a family connection, initially working in the office of Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. Internships of this kind were common pathways into government work, and nothing about her arrival distinguished her from dozens of other young graduates cycling through the West Wing that year. Her position brought her into regular contact with senior staff, and she was later moved into a paid role in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. It was during this period, beginning in November 1995, during a federal government shutdown that left the White House unusually short-staffed, that she began a relationship with President Bill Clinton, then 49 years old, and in the second year of his second term. The relationship, by nearly every account including her own later testimony, involved a significant imbalance of power. He was the sitting president of the United States. She was 22, several decades his junior, and several rungs below him on the White House staff hierarchy. That imbalance would become one of the most discussed and debated aspects of the story in the years that followed, particularly as cultural conversations about workplace power dynamics evolved substantially between 1998 and the present day. In April 1996, Lewinsky was transferred out of the White House to a position at the Pentagon, a move that has often been reported as an effort by senior staff to reduce the amount of time she was spending near the president. It was at the Pentagon that she met Linda Tripp, a co-worker roughly 2 decades her senior, who would go on to play a central and controversial role in exposing the relationship. The affair might have remained private were it not for its collision with an entirely separate legal matter. A sexual harassment lawsuit filed against Clinton by Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee, alleging misconduct that predated his presidency. As part of that civil case, Clinton was asked under oath about other relationships, including with Lewinsky, and he denied any sexual relationship with her, a denial later shown to be false. Tripp, who had built a close and confiding relationship with Lewinsky, began secretly recording their phone conversations in 1997, reportedly out of a belief that the tapes could be useful evidence of wrongdoing at the highest levels of government. She eventually brought those recordings to independent counsel Kenneth Starr, who was already investigating the Clintons on unrelated matters and whose mandate was expanded to include the Lewinsky affair. In January 1998, Tripp wore a recording device during a final lunch meeting with Lewinsky, providing investigators with additional material. The story broke publicly on January 17, 1998, when it was first reported online, a detail that, in retrospect, made the case an early landmark in how the internet would reshape political journalism, since the story broke before traditional print outlets were ready to run it. Within days, Lewinsky's name, photograph, and personal history were being broadcast, printed, and mocked across the country. President Clinton addressed the allegations publicly on January 26, 1998, standing beside his wife, Hillary Clinton, at a White House event, and stated firmly that he did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. The statement would become one of the most replayed and scrutinized sound bites in American political history, not only because it was later proven false, but because of how narrowly and specifically it was worded, a strategy that would come under intense scrutiny once the full details of the investigation became public. For much of 1998, Lewinsky's legal situation was precarious. In January of that year, under pressure to protect Clinton amid the Paula Jones litigation, she had signed a sworn affidavit denying a sexual relationship with the president, a statement that was false and that exposed her to. On July 28, 1998, Lewinsky agreed to testify before a federal grand jury, and in August of that year, she gave detailed testimony about the relationship. That same month, President Clinton testified via closed-circuit video, offering carefully hedged answers that drew intense public scrutiny and, at times, ridicule, including his now infamous parsing of the meaning of the word is. Physical evidence, including a garment later confirmed through DNA testing to contain genetic material matching Clinton, corroborated Lewinsky's account and made continued denial impossible. The Starr report, delivered to Congress in September 1998, laid out the findings of the investigation in extensive and, at the time, unusually explicit detail for a public government document, a decision that drew its own criticism, given that its most intimate contents concerned a 24-year-old private citizen who had not been accused of any crime against the public. On December 19, 1998, the House of Representatives voted to impeach President Clinton on 2 articles: perjury before a federal grand jury and obstruction of justice. The Senate trial that followed in early 1999 did not produce a conviction on either charge. The votes fell well short of the 2/3 majority required for removal from office, and Clinton completed the remainder of his term. He was later held in civil contempt of court and agreed to a fine and a temporary suspension of his law license in connection with his testimony in the Jones case. Clinton remained president. Lewinsky, who had committed no crime against the public and had been granted immunity for the private conduct that had put her at legal risk, nonetheless became the figure most associated with disgrace in the entire episode. What followed the scandal's public breaking was one of the most intense and sustained periods of media scrutiny any private individual had faced up to that point in American history. Lewinsky has described in interviews and in her own writing being trapped for months inside her mother's apartment, followed by photographers whenever she did leave, and mocked nightly on late-night television and in newspaper columns. She has said she stopped being seen, in the public imagination, as a person at all, reduced instead to a punchline and a political liability. This was notably one of the first instances of a private citizen experiencing what would now be recognized as viral-scale public shaming, occurring in the earliest days of the commercial internet, just before the rise of message boards, blogs, and eventually social media would make this kind of pile-on both more common and more inescapable for ordinary people. Lewinsky has since referred to herself, in speeches and writing, as an early example of what digital-age public humiliation would come to look like for millions of others in the years since. In the years immediately following the scandal, Lewinsky did take part in some of the media opportunities that came her way, largely because her employment prospects in almost any traditional field had effectively been destroyed by her notoriety. In March 1999, she sat for an extensive television interview with veteran journalist Barbara Walters, a broadcast that drew one of the largest audiences in American television history at the time. That same year, she released a memoir, Monica's Story, co-written with biographer Andrew Morton, which became an international bestseller. She also pursued a handbag design venture, launching a company that produced and sold her own designs in boutiques in the United States and United Kingdom, and took on some television hosting and guest appearance work in the early 2000s, including a dating show with an unconventional format. None of these ventures achieved lasting commercial traction, in large part because public and press attention rarely allowed the work to be evaluated on its own terms. Every project was filtered first through the scandal. For roughly a decade, beginning in the mid-2000s, Lewinsky largely withdrew from public life. She has said she turned down numerous lucrative offers during this period, for interviews, endorsements, and reality television appearances that she estimated cumulatively in the tens of millions of dollars, choosing instead to step back from a spotlight that she felt only ever wanted to relitigate 1998. During this period, she pursued further education, earning a master's degree in social psychology from the London School of Economics, and attempted to build a quieter, more private life, including working in fields unrelated to her public notoriety. She has spoken candidly about job interviews that ended the moment a prospective employer recognized her name, and about the practical, ongoing difficulty of building a career when one's entire adult life had been defined publicly by a single, deeply personal episode from her 20s. The turning point in Lewinsky's public story came in the summer of 2014, when she published an essay in Vanity Fair titled Shame and Survival. In it, she wrote candidly about the psychological toll the scandal had taken and about her decision to step back into public life. Not to relitigate the past, but to speak about a culture of public shaming that had, by then, migrated from tabloid front pages onto the internet, where its effects were being felt by ordinary people, including teenagers, with sometimes tragic consequences. She has cited the 2010 suicide of Rutgers student Tyler Clementi, who died after being cyberbullied, as a significant factor in her decision to speak publicly again. That essay led to a widely viewed 2015 TED Talk titled The Price of Shame, delivered at the TED 2015 conference in Vancouver. In it, Lewinsky described herself as patient zero of internet-age public humiliation, someone whose reputation had been destroyed online before online cruelty had a name most people recognized, and before there were any real cultural or legal frameworks for addressing it. The talk addressed the mechanics of public shaming, the attention economy that rewards it, and the human cost that gets lost in headlines and jokes. It has since been viewed tens of millions of times and is regularly cited in discussions of online harassment and digital ethics. Lewinsky became a strategic advisor to Bystander Revolution, an anti-bullying initiative aimed at giving young people practical tools to intervene when they witness bullying, whether online or in person. Her involvement drew directly on her own experience of being targeted, and she has spoken specifically about the importance of bystander behavior. The difference between people who pile on, people who stay silent, and people who intervene, as a central lesson from her own life. She has also worked with organizations focused on digital civility and online safety, participated in campaigns aimed at technology companies to encourage better moderation and design choices, and testified and spoken publicly about the need for stronger protections against online harassment, including for private citizens who suddenly find themselves the subject of viral attention through no fault of their own. Her advocacy work has often emphasized a distinction she considers important: the difference between accountability, which she has said she accepts for her own choices, and public cruelty, which she argues serves no purpose beyond entertainment and psychological harm. This distinction has become a recurring theme across her speeches, essays, and later television work. In the years that followed her return to public life, Lewinsky moved into television and film production, forming a production company and pursuing scripted and unscripted projects. Her most prominent producing credit came with Impeachment, American Crime Story, the 2021 FX anthology series that dramatized the events of 1998 from multiple perspectives, including her own, as well as those of Linda Tripp, Paula Jones, and Hillary Clinton. Lewinsky served as a producer on the series and was involved in shaping how her own story would be portrayed on screen, a level of narrative control she had never had during the original scandal, when her story was told almost entirely by others: prosecutors, political operatives, tabloid reporters, and late-night comedians. Taking a producing role on a dramatization of her own life was, by her account, a deliberate act of reclaiming a narrative that had been controlled by other people for more than 2 decades. Critics and commentators covering the series' release frequently noted this shift. that for the first time, the woman at the center of the story had genuine authorship over how it would be told. She has also been involved in producing documentary and unscripted projects addressing themes of public shaming, reputation, and reinvention, continuing to build a production slate focused on stories about people navigating public failure, public exposure, and the process of rebuilding afterward. Themes that connect directly back to her own experience. More recently, Lewinsky has moved into podcasting, hosting a show centered on conversations with guests who have, in various and often very different ways, had to rebuild their lives, careers, or reputations after a period of public failure, scrutiny, or exposure. The format reflects the same through line that has run through her advocacy work for roughly a decade, turning a deeply personal ordeal into a broader public conversation about dignity, resilience, and the possibility of a second chapter, for herself and for others who find themselves in similarly exposed positions. In interviews promoting the podcast, she has spoken openly about how her understanding of the events of 1998 has evolved over the decades, from the perspective of a 22-year-old who, by her own later account, believed she was in a genuine relationship with real emotional stakes, to a more clear-eyed understanding developed over many years and considerable reflection of the power dynamics that shaped that relationship. She has said this evolving understanding is part of why she felt the story needed to be revisited on her own terms rather than left exactly as it had been told in 1998. Despite persistent online claims that Lewinsky is worth tens of millions of dollars, her actual net worth has been far more modest, according to the estimates that have circulated in financial and entertainment media over the years. Public estimates have generally placed her net worth somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 million. A figure built primarily from her 1999 book advance, speaking fees, television and interview payments, and more recent production and media income, offset significantly by the reality that she declined many of the largest commercial offers available to her, particularly during the years when she was actively trying to distance herself from the scandal rather than capitalize on it. That is a meaningfully smaller fortune than the public often assumes for someone whose name became so globally recognizable. It reflects, in large part, a series of deliberate choices. Lewinsky has said publicly, including in her TED Talk and subsequent interviews, that she turned down offers reportedly worth tens of millions of dollars combined over the years for tabloid interviews, endorsement deals, and reality television projects, because accepting them would have meant continuing to be defined by 1998 on someone else's terms, rather than eventually being able to tell her own story her own way. That decision very likely cost her substantially in immediate income. It also appears to be central to how she was eventually able to rebuild a public identity that extended beyond the scandal at all. Her current income streams, based on public reporting, are primarily tied to speaking engagements, advocacy-related consulting, television and film producing credits, and podcast and media work, a portfolio that looks less like a tabloid fortune and more like the career of an established media professional and public speaker, which is, in practical terms, closer to what she has become. Between the initial wave of coverage in 1998 to 1999 and her reemergence as an advocate in 2014, Lewinsky made a number of scattered media appearances that are often overlooked in accounts of her life, but that illustrate just how long and uneven the process of rebuilding actually was. She appeared on British and European television programs exploring American culture from an outsider's perspective, took part in comedic sketches and talk show interviews in the early 2000s, and was a guest on numerous late-night and daytime programs in both the United States and United Kingdom.